Hey everybody, my name's Kyle and this is Track by Track, music reviews, news, and commentary. In my opinion, the White Stripes were a pretty good band. Not one of my favorites, but I liked most of what I heard from them. I liked them well enough that I thought picking up Jack White's 2012 debut as a solo artist was at least worth a shot. And I'm certainly glad I did. Blunderbuss ended up being one of my personal favorite albums that year, so naturally 2 years later when the follow-up album was announced, I planned to pick it up the day it came out on June 10th. But when I realized that I'd be in Nashville for a few days, just 2 weeks following the release of Lazaretto, I knew the album would have to wait. Nashville is, of course, the home of Jack White's Third Man Records, as well as the Third Man Record Store. It seemed only appropriate, considering the timing, that I should wait and buy Jack White's new album at Jack White's actual record store. I'm glad I did that. It was a very cool experience, and most importantly, the new album did not disappoint. It's been almost 4 years since that last Jack White studio album, and now we're finally seeing album number 3. White originally teased the release of Boarding House Reach back in December with an eclectic musical montage made up of snippets from the record. It was hard to really discern any structure from that first fragmented glimpse at the new music, and I originally dismissed that as sort of style over substance. But as we started to hear some of the early singles from the album, it started to become clear that Jack White's approach to this album might actually be as unstructured as that preview montage suggested. Now that the album is finally here, it seems unstructured is an understatement. Boarding House Reach is, well, kind of a train wreck. It's a collection of 13 tracks of what frequently feels like experimental improvisation, pointless meandering, unamusing interludes, and wildly underdeveloped musical ideas. At best, there's an EP worth of decent material here. At best. We have raw materials for something more, but nothing meaningful comes of it. Boarding House Reach opens with the song that was also the first single from the album. Connected by Love is a surprising song to lead off with musically because it's dominated by keyboard instruments, from the opening synthesizer pulses to the piano and organ that lay the foundation for the track. It's not until the guitar solo halfway through the song that we hear any guitar at all, and that's even sandwiched between 2 organ solos. Still, the song features some of White's trademark gospel elements, occasionally verging on hymn-like. As both a lead single and an album opener, though, I have to say that this song doesn't get me excited. It's an okay track, and I might have liked it better deeper into the album. But truly, the Boarding House train wreck begins on track 2. Why Walk a Dog is essentially 2.5 minutes of Jack White pondering the value of pet ownership, I guess. Dogs, birds, cats, Jack just doesn't seem to see the point. I don't see the point either of the song. I mean, musically, it's an interesting enough piece, again anchored by blues organ like the previous song, but lyrically it sounds like he's singing the words from a poem that he wrote in grade school. Coming from a 10-year-old, this might sound mildly clever. Coming from Jack White, though, it's offensive. Not offensive in meaning it's too juvenile to be taken seriously. No, it's offensive in terms of being an utter waste of time. It's a waste of Jack's time, it's a waste of my time, and it's a waste of your time. Enough said? Time to move on. Track 3 is where I start to really wonder if Jack White had any plan at all for this album. Corporation is the longest track on Boarding House Reach, and it plays like a jam session where White gives the band a theme and they just riff on that for 5.5 minutes. The problem is, it never really goes anywhere. I dig the groove that they're laying down, from the Led Zeppelin-esque immigrant song drums at the beginning to the Prince-like screeches peppered around the second half, but you know, ultimately it just feels like it's all improvised and random, right down to the spoken or chanted lyrics. And I use the term lyrics loosely here. On the 4th track, Jack White surrenders the mic to bluesman C.W. Stone King. At this point you'd think maybe that was a good thing. Alas, we get a rambling spoken word interlude that begins with the words, "These are my demands," and then proceeds to make no demands whatsoever for 1.5 minutes. At the very end, finally, we get not a demand, but a polite request for a cup of tea. After a short break, Jack comes back refreshed for yet another ambling musical experiment. Hyper Misophoniac is an extraordinarily noisy song filled with odd sounds and jolting rhythms. It does contain one revealing lyric, though. Jack sings, "I start to think that I'm the only one that can hear all the sounds in the world." On this song, if not the whole album, it kind of feels like that's what he's working with, all the sounds in the world just tossed in a blender. And then there's the repeated lyrics on the chorus. I think it's supposed to be the chorus anyway. Ain't no running when you're robbing a bank. Really? Ain't no running when you're robbing a bank? Have you seen literally every bank heist movie ever made? I mean, Baby Driver was one long chase scene following a bank robbery. If you're wondering why Kevin Spacey didn't include Jack White and his elite crew, here's your answer. Next up is the first of 2 tracks that had their genesis as collaborations with Jay-Z. Jack White revived the elements of these songs after his sessions with the legendary rapper failed to develop into anything fruitful. Ice Station Zebra feels a lot like Corporation at first, with a similar groove and vibe, but unlike that earlier track, this song at least feels like it's going somewhere. Not that I'd say it's fully formed. In fact, it still feels a bit half-baked. And when Jack White raps here, it plays a little bit like the theme from The Fresh Prince at first. And as the song evolves, it actually begins to sound more like a mashup of Beastie Boys and Flight of the Conchords. To say that I don't hate it almost feels like praise at this point. The second song to rise from the ashes of the Jay-Z sessions is Over and Over and Over. This is easily the best rocker on the album, although, again, the bar is set pretty low. Still, I think this song comes closest to delivering what it is that you want on a Jack White album. It also has the catchiest hook on Boarding House Reach, with a repeated fuzzy guitar lick that would feel right at home on a Lenny Kravitz album. If you ever wondered what it would sound like if Bono, Pink Floyd, and Radiohead got together and recorded a song for Sesame Street, wonder no more. Everything You've Ever Learned is that song. And again, it's not a song, really. It's yet another spoken word interlude. Now, of the 3 pieces like this on Boarding House Reach, Everything You've Ever Learned is the best. And if it was the only one, it might even be refreshing. But because it's mixed in with all the rest of the random chaos on this album, it feels more like another tedious exercise in pretentiousness. Next up is one more of the early singles from the album. For the life of me, I'm not sure why White thought that this would be a good choice for a single. However, I will say that musically speaking, it is fairly representative of the way the album as a whole sounds. From that perspective, I guess it's a good sampler. The first half of Respect Commander sounds like either a demo from a Casio keyboard circa 1988 or maybe an Art of Noise B-side from that same era. Halfway through, the song completely shifts gears, tempo, and time signature to morph into a dirty blues number. It's a total identity crisis, to be sure, so why wouldn't it represent the album as a single? Track 10 brings us the final spoken word interlude on Boarding House Reach. Esmeralda Steals the Show is a quaint enough bit of descriptive storytelling, more focused and purposeful than anything else on the album. But it's not especially interesting from a narrative perspective, not to mention musically. And like Everything You've Ever Learned, if this was the only interlude on the album, it might be less irritating. But at this point on the album, I'm pretty tired of this shtick. The final words of Esmeralda Steals the Show describe how I feel about the track. Totally absurd. On Get in the Mind Shaft, White shifts into Daft Punk mode with tons of synthesizer accents and the vocals completely distorted with vocoder effects. I have to say, though, that among the many experimental tracks on this album where White is toying with unusual sounds or ideas, this is one of my favorites. But just like so many of those other tracks, this so-called song just doesn't go anywhere. There's some interesting ideas here, but they never get pulled together into anything close to being cohesive. As Boarding House Reach reaches its penultimate track, Jack White takes a pretty massive left turn from the random electro-funk of the previous track, not to mention the rest of the album. Lo and behold, the country blues of What's Done Is Done is actually a proper song, fully developed and executed. Now, I'm not necessarily saying it's a good song, but at this point in the proceedings, it's a welcome change of pace. Still, it feels completely out of place with the rest of the album. And then there's the lyrics about love gone bad. So bad, in fact, that he sings, "I'm walking downtown to the store and I'm buying a gun." He repeats that lyric 3 times. It's basically the chorus of the song. Now, in this day and age, how tone-deaf to our times does an artist have to be to put out a song where they suggest that the solution to life's problems is to go buy a gun? Throughout most of the song, it's a little ambiguous how he plans to use that gun. Is he considering suicide? Would that outcome actually make this song acceptable? Jack finally reveals his intentions in the spoken words at the very end of the song. "Either you go or I go, and it won't be me." Thanks for clearing that up, Jack. Shall we call up Stoneman Douglas High School and see if they still need a theme song for their prom? Anyway, the final song on Boarding House Reach is a sort of lullaby, really, and to that end it works well as an album closer. Humoresque is a pretty song, but we can't necessarily credit Jack White for that. The song was actually written by notorious gangster Al Capone, who penned lyrics for music based on a Dvorak composition while doing time in Alcatraz. That's very interesting, I suppose, but it's also very telling that one of the most satisfying songs on this album wasn't even written by Jack White at all. You know, each time I listened to this album, I started it hoping it would resonate with me more positively than the previous time. What I found was that the exact opposite happened. The more I listened, the less I liked it. I don't see myself pulling this album out very often at all in the future. And what's frustrating is there are a ton of musical fragments scattered throughout this album that sound like they have the potential to develop into something that could actually be cool. Instead, I feel like Boarding House Reach is nothing more than a collection of studio scraps, recordings from jam sessions, or bits of musical brainstorming as Jack was looking for ideas for new music. In the 4 years since Lazaretto, I'd have hoped and expected White would have delivered something far more cohesive than this. And I'm all for experimenting with your sound and trying new musical directions, but figure that out before you make an album. I don't think Jack White is afraid of alienating some listeners or fans, and I'd accept that and his new music if I felt like he'd approached the album earnestly. But I don't think he did. And coming from someone as talented as Jack White, that's a real shame. So I'm giving Boarding House Reach an X rating of 3 out of 10. It's far and away the weakest thing that Jack White has ever released, and a possible frontrunner for worst album of the year. But hey, if you disagree, and I know that some of you will, you can sound off in the comments below. Once again, my name is Kyle and this is Track by Track. If you like what you see, be sure to leave a thumbs up on this video and be sure to check out some of these other videos down here on my channel below. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe because true music fans always want new releases the day they come out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.